So my name is Miguel Amado, and I am the director of Sirius Art Center in Cobh, County Cork. And I am here joined by two colleagues, Brian, who may be able to say hi, and Megan.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hi, Megan.
And then we are also joined today by Colette Lewis, the artist Colette Lewis, who is based in Cork City.
Hello.
And then we have representatives of Cobh Zero Waste. We have Stephen.
Hi.
And Jim.
Hi.
And then we have Angela, who is based in, I can't remember in which town you are in County Cork.
I'm in Mallow, actually.
In Mallow, yeah.
Yeah, in Mallow,
and
yeah.
Angie is a doctoral researcher at University College Cork, and she will be speaking next week. So she's also involved in different activities related to the environmental questions. And then we have, maybe because we are a small group, maybe each one of you can introduce yourselves and then we can proceed. So maybe Micah.
Hi, I'm Micah. Yeah, so I've been working with Steve last year on the My Town My Plan project. That's a training project by CCAT where we developed an energy plan for Cobh. So now we just have to do it. So yeah, so that's how I'm a little bit involved with Cobh Zero Waste that way. I also was part of the Sirius project last year. What was it called again? The community project that involved the whole town basically. So I took pictures of vacant buildings and was part of the Vacant Building Appreciation Society. So I really enjoyed working with that. So yeah, I have an interest. I'm a bit of an activist as well. So I have an interest in environment and economy as well. The whole idea of a circular economy and equality as well speaks to me. So I'm very interested in this project. So very keen to see what you guys have to say and discussions and all that.
Great.
Alessandra.
Hi, hopefully I got rid of my pink screen. I'm Alessandra. I'm currently living in Amsterdam. I am one of the co-curator of the Arte Utile archive, which I don't know if perhaps, but anyway, it doesn't matter. It's an archive about artistic practices that basically use art as a tool for social change mainly. And I have been working in the past with Miguel for some projects. I was actually there last year, precisely during this time before Christmas, because we collaborated for a limited edition publication. So I'm currently a PhD candidate at the Liverpool John Moores University, and my research is about how socially engaged art practices, but mainly arte utile, can become a fertile ground for changing the institution of education. And I'm currently working on a project called Decentralizing Political Economies. So that's why I'm here, because I see that there is also this focus on economy and how to approach economy in a different way. So I'm super curious to hear tonight about what you are doing in Cobh and your context.
Okay, I was wondering whether Lelia, Pat, and Anna would like also to introduce themselves.
Thanks for the call. I'm glad you found something you like. I look forward to having seeing you on you. All right.
There is someone who has the unmute.
Take care.
Sorry?
That's Pat Flynn.
It's Pat.
So Pat's with Cobh Zero Waste.
Okay, Pat. Pat, would you say, do you want to introduce yourself? Not sure she's listening. She's hearing me.
Miguel, were you talking to me? Sorry.
Yeah, would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Yeah, okay. I've no connection to Cork, I'm afraid, or to Cobh, but that's okay. I'm a landscape artist, and my work, it revolves around the environment. I suppose my only connection to Cork is I did my MA in Crawford last year. Yeah, so I just saw the project online and your series of Zoom meetings, and I was very interested in it. I'm kind of, at the moment, I suppose my practice isn't socially engaged, but I'm interested in kind of finding ways of getting communities to engage kind of with the environment through my art. So yeah, so that's kind of it in a nutshell. So.
Okay, so anyone else wants to say a few words about themselves, or shall we proceed with our conversation? Okay, so all right, so basically the rationale behind today is to enable 3 different organizations and people who somehow came together in the during this year, during 2020 and before, but I only started working at Sirius Art Center early this year, and then COVID-19 came and things have been quite convoluted because we had to close several times, 2 times for long periods, and a lot of work that could have been done in the ground in Cobh and beyond couldn't take place because of the first lockdown and the aftermaths of that. One of the projects that was coming to an end when I started was what has been called a creative inquiry around how older people engage with the arts. And this was Arts Council of Ireland funded project led by Cork City Council in collaboration with Cork County Council, and involving 3 different arts organizations, one of which was Sirius Art Center. And the artist that was working with Sirius Art Center at the time is Colette. And I started immediately when the project was coming to an end, at least in its in the form that it had been formulated or created. And since that, this is more or less February this year, since then, that I had an interest in pushing further some aspects of that project into basically a new project or a new set of ideas. And the conversation started with Colette, and she'll describe better what was the project about. But basically, conversation started with Colette around what to do and our common interests. And we came to understand and realize that we had both interests in alternative economic systems and how productivity associated with capital and modernization neglects still today different types of knowledge and skills and puts them aside, and how to revitalize them as basically a way to develop more community focused and based economic activity and practices, and through that contribute to a more sustainable social life, which is somehow operating outside of mainstream capitalist models. Through that conversation emerged the connection with Cobh Zero Waste, which is a local an organization based in Cobh, very active around environmental matters, and also which also had been involved in one way or the other with the Creative Inquiry project that Colette had been developing with Sirius Art Center. So basically, we realized that we had commonalities and shared interests, and we thought how to put that in action. Well, I originally and ideally, Sirius Art Center is also a space that not only fosters and promotes and produces art, but also enables community voices and practices to be heard or to be activated. And thus there was already an interest in connecting with Cobh Zero Waste. And so that's how these 3 organizations, individuals came together. We have been trying in recent months to develop a body of work that could start a pilot or planting seeds towards creating more discussion around sustainable living strategies in Cobh, and using Cobh as a case study for other regions, other towns in Ireland and beyond. And what we are doing now, starting today, it's basically setting up a series of kind of pointers, intellectual pointers and references, but also enabling people to get together with us that can contribute to the discussions or to the practice that we want to implement in the future. So imagine this series of events that we are organizing starting today, continuing next week, and then going forward until May next year. They basically enable us to create an informal group of people with whom we can all share ideas, references, practices through talks, discussions, reading groups, workshops, so that we kind of create a common ground, a territory through which then we can evolve into something else, which we hope to implement from the next spring onwards, and also trying to play with the COVID-19 situation, hoping that more face-to-face activity might be able to happen, but also keeping that face-to-face localized activity connected through our network, which we are starting today. So that's kind of like the introduction and how this came together. So today the idea is that because we want to form this group, this informal group, and people will come and will join us on different occasions across this period of time, we thought that it was important to start by basically sharing who we are or what are our ideals and principles. And so today is basically about that, is enabling Cobh Zero Waste to introduce themselves, Colette to introduce herself and explain the project that she developed last year that is somehow behind this now. And then maybe I'll have an opportunity to say a few more things about what me, Megan, Brian, other colleagues are trying to put together for Sirius from next year onwards. Does it make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So just some housekeeping. So we are recording the session for documentation purposes. We don't plan to publish it or put it or make it available. If that happens, we'll be in touch with you. But at this stage, it's not necessary. It's not in our mind. So it's just to keep a record. Also with respect to our funders who are. Sirius Arts Centre is funded by the Arts Council of Ireland Cork County Council, and this particular project is funded by a program in Ireland called Creative Ireland, the grant of which we secured through Cork County Council. And basically that's it. So the idea is to keep everything very informal so that everyone is happy can share. We don't want to use this as it's not to do a lecture. We'll have other sessions where maybe there will be more learning and sharing of ideas. Today is more about creating a communal environment where everyone can basically approach or share what they do and what they think they can contribute to this idea. Okay, so maybe I can then hand over to Stephen, who can introduce himself better and then start discussing the ideas around Cobh Zero Waste. You have to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay. Hi, everyone. Miguel, I'm going to share some slides if that's okay.
Yeah, you can already share your screen. Yes.
Okay, great stuff. Hopefully everyone can see that now. Because it's going to be much easier for me to talk about what we do.
Stephen, could you just say a few words about yourself first, and then you can lead us to Cobh Zero Waste?
Sure, we'll do that. Okay, so yeah, I'm Steve. I've been living in Cobh for 20 years now, and I'm a university lecturer. I lecture in international development. So up until fairly recently, I was mainly traveling overseas and lecturing in UCC for about the past, I suppose, 7 or 8 years now. And, you know, I've got more, and over that time, I've got more and more involved with some of the groups, and particularly the Cork Harbour Alliance for a Safe Environment and Cobh Tidy Towns and Cobh Community Allotments, who are all kind of founding members of this thing that we now call Cobh Zero Waste that got set up about 3 years ago. Well, we started talking about it, I guess, about 4 years ago. And I remember at the time, Chase, who are, if you don't know about them, I mean, most people should, I think, in Cobh anyway, but for those outside, Cork Harbour Alliance for a Safe Environment, they have been an amazing group that have been campaigning against one particular company trying to establish an incinerator in the harbour for the past 20 or more years. And they're actually on their third round of opposition now to planning permission for an incinerator over the other side of the harbour, which makes absolutely no sense in today's world of circular economies and sustainability and all the other things. But you know, despite that, they've had no support at all from the government. You know, or everything has had to, all of their campaigning has had to be done through fundraising, and I just think they're an amazing group of people. And you know, I've only really been involved in the fringes with them, but certainly, you know, as an economist, I was, you know, very interested in the idea that anybody would even think about putting an incinerator in at this stage of thinking around sustainability issues. And so I think some of the members just got a bit fed up with me after a while and started telling me, look, if you're going to do something, just set up a zero waste organization or do something. And there were other people, of course, very interested in this, already working in zero waste issues, like Moggy and Anna and you know, various other people that have been working with companies and trying to make Cobh a greener place for years and years. And so, you know, all these groups got together, Cobh Tidy Towns, Chase, and the community allotments, who I was kind of very involved with at the time, to form Cobh Zero Waste. So that's how we started. And we've been going for about 3 years, I'd say, since then. So what do we do? I think probably the best way is just to show you some pictures of the type of activities that we tried to do to, and I guess we probably should say something about, you know, our motivation is all around the idea of the circular economy and sustainability. And so a lot of our work is educational and just trying to promote awareness about zero waste issues. And so we'll have a look at some of those. We have a kind of philosophy, I guess, in some ways, in terms of a waste hierarchy, and that's the waste hierarchy is kind of developed over time. But I suppose this is one of the latest models of thinking, and really, you know, the key thing to start off with is to try and refuse what we don't need, and to change the way we actually produce and consume by redesigning all of our goods to make them, you know, much more reusable rather than single-use goods, so that they can be taken apart and reused again, or even the kind of purchasing models, so that there's more leasing involved, which then encourages repairs of goods or encourages as well the production of long-lasting goods. So redesign, rethinking, refusing what we don't need is a big starting point in the zero waste hierarchy now. Then reducing the amount of products that we consume to minimise our ecological footprint on the planet. Also more preparation for reuse. And then we get down a bit further. I won't keep going on about this. This is getting a little bit theoretical, into recycling and material and chemical recovery. Of course, the things that are totally unacceptable are things like incineration, which destroys valuable resources. And so that's, you know, these are just some of the things, some of the goals that we have within our strategic plan. We're really looking to try and reduce waste and all the resources used in production and distribution of products, and also improving recycling, because of course that also reduces the amount of waste. Redesign the products, we talked about those, new purchasing systems. So now I'm just going to show you some pictures of what we do, far more interesting. One of the success stories, I guess, of the organization has been the market stall, which has gone from strength to strength. And we use very much for community engagement. You know, we have regular customers coming for the eco refills of different cleaning products. And we also sell some other, you know, kind of zero waste products that are made from recycled materials. But we also use it to engage discussion and to inform. And you know, I think over the past 3 years now, we've established ourselves, I think, within the market, and we're hoping to do even more in the future. And we've just got a new gazebo to help us develop that a little bit more. We've also been involved in trying to promote reusable coffee cups with tidy towns. We also have purchased a whole load of reusable water mugs to try and discourage the throwing of plastic bottles, which happens every year in the annual run around the island. So, and we can use them for other events as well, of course. We started, when we started 2017, we felt the best way was to try and get some experts in to tell us, you know, exactly how to go about this zero waste business. And so we just went for the best in the world, of course, which was Beer Johnson from the US. We got all the way over from the United States to talk to us in the Rochestown Park Hotel. And there's a picture there of her waste that she's collected for the year. That's how much waste she produces. And of course, she's written a number of books on the subject, and really is regarded as one of the key experts and one of the earliest proponents as well of the zero waste concept. And another guy, Paul Connett, actually as well from the US, came over to talk about, you know, he's produced a lot of academic papers, so it's a more kind of academic style talk that Paul did for us fairly early on. We've some amazing artists in the team. The posters that come out are just incredible. I'm always flabbergasted by them. Here is an event on, so we do a lot of these kind of community events. Is one that we had, Are We Talking Rubbish? Where we just basically discussed and talked rubbish for an evening, and about, you know, how we actually reduce our waste, what tips we could give people to try and reduce their waste down, which should save them money, of course, in the long run, but also recycling, and some information about things like, we had a few games about, you know, how long do certain products stay in the or take to rot down, and so we had a few quizzes. We had an upcycling day on a Saturday at a weekend, and clothes swap at the same time, I think it was that day, where we, you know, which was a really good event, lots of people involved. And so a lot of these kind of information evenings and weekends we hold in the community hall. We talk about various issues, we get people involved in looking at different aspects of waste, and we're trying to learn from other people as well. You know, it's a learning process. You know, what tips other people have for us, and we're trying to put these all together and develop some kind of you know, a list of tips, and to try and develop that part of our new website. We've had lots of experts like Angie coming and talking to us about how to improve our recycling. I think this was part of the Voice workshop series. We do, oh, that one didn't come out so well, but here's an article we had in the Examiner. So we try and do some you know, awareness raising through the media. And some advocacy work as well through them, some letters to the press. Here's an involvement with some of the younger group members in the group who were involved in the school strike for climate that we supported, along with the Green Step, who we work closely with. A campaign that we had, Sick of Plastic, that's one of our supermarket days. And I think this type of action is a good example of what people can do on a practical basis. And this was involved in doing some shopping and removing all the single-use plastic that was involved and leaving it at the supermarket for them to deal with. And actually, since that happened, they've developed, those supermarkets have now put in places so that you can leave your single plastic in a certain area. We're now in the process of trying to get them to completely remove single plastic, of course, from their packaging streams. We've done a few workshops on food waste. Food waste, of course, is a big thing. Not everybody has a brown bin, and not everybody would compost. So a lot of food waste is going into our general waste. In fact, it's the biggest component of our general waste. Would you believe it's still, the biggest tonnage? And so when those incinerators are burning our mixed waste, a lot of really valuable organic material is going up in smoke, and whereas it should be recycled back, as compost, or if we use it in an aerobic digester, we can produce biogas and organic fertilizer go back into the soil. So we have far too much food being wasted to start off with, and then far too much of that food waste not being recycled. And so we had a very interesting talk on how we can improve our food waste here. And we had now I always forget the name of this. Isn't there anybody chip in here? What's the name of the system there that you can use in the home? Is it something like kombucha? Anybody? No, nobody else knows. Okay, it's something like that anyway. Here was a talk we had on, this was with the community allotments group actually, on the importance of tree planting. So we planted a whole load of trees that day, and we had a great talk about how tree planting can improve sustainability. And in the background, you see the community allotments there. We've had clothes swaps. This is one on International Buy Nothing Day. And here's one of the events we had actually with the Sirius that Miguel was talking about. This was a reuse and repair cafe that we held, which was really successful and very interesting in terms of particularly older generations working with younger generations to swap skills about how to to mend clothes and do things that are less commonly done these days. But that was a really good day. We involved the schools a lot, so we have a lot of educational kind of work, as I was saying. So every year we have a schools program where we get them to do various activities, or they volunteer actually, but we give them certificates at the end of the day and get them involved in, and do a presentation to them as well on what Cobh Zero Waste is doing, and try and get them involved in thinking about these kind of issues. And then, as Miguel was saying, recently we haven't been able to do as much this past year, but so we've been doing a lot of online talks, and we've been getting more involved in wider issues, wider sustainability issues, particularly on things like renewable energy, with a number of big projects that we heard about that are going to be developed just off the coast, a big offshore wind farm. And then on the island itself, a solar farm just down the road from us here, which we got the companies to talk to us about. Had a really interesting talk from Ellie on sustainable food systems. Well, it was labelled a sustainable Christmas dinner, but actually she gave us a fantastic talk on different aspects of sustainability in the food system. Oh yeah, and we also had the Arran Isles Energy Co-op talking to us. that's just a few of the examples of the type of thing. We've had other online, in fact, we've done some online repair cafes and other workshops online as well. And as Michael was saying, and I completely forgot about this one because when I was putting these slides together, the My Town, My Plan was that we were involved in was looking at developing a sustainable energy plan for the town. And this is what we really miss, is actually being able to get together and have our normal meetings, our normal kind of fortnightly meetings to plan things and to do actions. And I have to say, it's been a really difficult time this past few months, not being able to just get together and get on with that. So we've certainly missed that aspect of the of our work. And this is just a screenshot of our new fancy website that we've developed during lockdown, just talking a little bit about our mission. And there's some members of the team there, including Brendan Richardson, who's one of the founder members, who sadly passed away fairly recently. And so, you know, we owe a lot to him for where we've got to today. So I think I'll finish there. That's enough of an introduction. There's a few other slides that we could look at, but I think I've gone on for too long as it is. So I'll hand you back and stop sharing. Hang on.
Okay, Stephen, thanks so much. It was very interesting to have it was very interesting that you were able to provide a wider perspective of the activity that Cobh Zero Waste has been putting together. Also, where it sits among different kinds of organizations who have more or less shared concerns and interests around the environmental questions. And also the potential for some of these ideas to proceed to evolve, particularly around implementation, direct implementation, but also larger narratives around discussion and knowledge production that somehow inform some of the work that you and others have been doing. It was so when you mentioned the Repair Cafe event that took place at Sirius Art Center, that was, Megan was also involved in that, for instance, and that was something that was facilitated by Sirius in the framework of the project that Colette was developing. And so maybe it's now time to hear from Colette around her practice a little bit and how her practice intersects with some of these ideas or potentially intersect with some of these ideas. Is that okay?
Yep. So I'm going to share my my screen here. Just to start. Okay. So what I'm going to talk about is I'm going to talk about social art practice, and I'm going to talk about the Creative Inquiry project, which I guess is really central and key to how this whole conversation started. So I guess for the benefit of Cobh Zero Waste, I guess to maybe think about an understanding of, you know, what exactly is social art practice. I know to a lot of people outside of arts practice in particular, they're always wondering, yeah, but what actually is it? Where's the painting? Where's the drawing? So there's often a lot of discussion and inquiry around what exactly does an artist do that socially is socially engaged. And it's a number of things. It doesn't have a clear definition. I guess what I can talk about perhaps maybe are some of the kind of characteristics or aspects and elements that that enter into the type of practice that I've been developing in my practice over a number of years. So even my own social art practice has developed and evolved over the years. It's a way of working that evolved for me, I think, really since 2002. And what I found was that I was always interested in working with other people. Sometimes collaboratively with other artists and sometimes other artists of other disciplines. And specifically, I was interested in engaging with more kind of socially based issues and working with more contexts, whether that was within social housing, whether that was within the disability sector, whether it was within healthcare, whether it was in farming communities, and it continues to evolve. It continues to evolve in terms of an inquiry. So I guess what I would say about my practice is that it's collaborative. And it's a practice that's socially engaged. I use a socially engaged approach to actually making and producing art. For quite some time, my interest has specifically been around latent knowledge, and a latent knowledge that's embedded within a place and also within people. So that's what I'm going to talk about really in relation to the inquiry that I brought to the project, which was the Creative Inquiry project. And what I would say is that there's a particular way, like, so the method, I suppose I would say that I use, it's an artistic process, thinking about artistic process as a new form of social encounter where a creative kind of thinking and action can happen. That is sensory based, affective, reflective, visual, imaginative, intuitive, discursive, and critical. So it's quite broad in terms of maybe the different kind of sensibilities that are utilized in terms of the practice. So it's a lot of things, and it's continually expanding, and it's also because it's collaborative. So for example, now in terms of thinking about conversations with Cobh Zero Waste in particular, is that it's also an adaptive practice that sort of takes on some of the forms and formats used by other practices and practitioners. So in a sense, you could say it's quite interdisciplinary in that sense. And I guess that's one thing that's actually quite innovative about artistic practice, is that it does tend to, you could say, become a hybrid of other disciplines, and it can cross those boundaries and those territories. And I think that's what makes it a really exciting area of practice to be engaged in as well. So the roots really of why we're here stemmed from the Creative Inquiry Artist Residency that Miguel referred to. And this was an initiative of Cork City and Cork City County Council, hosted by 3 key organisations, Sirius Arts Centre being one, in a regional context, also Music Alive in West Cork, and Cork Midsummer Festival. So those were the 3 contexts in which artists were commissioned to engage with questions around looking at creative approaches for arts to engage with older people, and in particular to ask questions that related to art and aging. And that culminated, that was a 9-month residency that started in 2019, started in May. The project's kind of more or less wrapped up by the end of the year. And then in February, there was a public presentation about the projects, about the research, and also a launch of a publication which is available online. Actually, the only place I've seen it online is on artsandhealth.ie. It is, you can actually download it there. So it will be called the Creative Inquiry Report. So in terms of, I guess, the research questions that I was interested in, but also in relation to the series at that time. So one of the questions that we had was like, how can an arts centre and arts practice facilitate meaningful opportunities and creative engagement and participation for older people in Cobh and Great Island communities? So that was a starting point. And then I suppose in relation to my own practice, my own practice and interest around latent knowledge, embodied knowledge within a place and within people. The question that came up for me was, what is the value of older people's knowledge? And at the time I was reading a book which is called This Chair Rocks, a Manifesto Against Racism, written by Ashton Applewhite. And there was one key sort of phrase that I extracted from that, because that made me think about knowledge of older people and its relationship in terms of the economy. So she refers to how both modernity and ageism have robbed society of an immense accrual of knowledge and experience of older members of our society through valuing economic productivity over humanitarian and communitarian ones. So this was a real kind of key question, I suppose, as an artist, but also thinking about, how we could kind of maybe use this as a question that would lead an inquiry and also consider the wider kind of questions that related to kind of arts and aging as well. And I think one of the key sort of considerations was like arts activity that engages older people. Is it fit for purpose or has it outdated? So thinking about, you know, engaging with older people through social art practice was something that I was definitely keenly interested in. So one of the approaches that I would typically use is to consider is to connect with the lived knowledge and experience of people and place. And knowing that, you know, or even asking the question, can an arts practice open up a space for creative imagining, collaboration, discussion and dialogue that can challenge, influence and transform attitudes and thinking? So there inherent, I guess, for me is the potential of the political within the artistic practice, in terms of opening up this space for discussion and inquiry, but also engaging with it through sort of creative methods. So thinking and action is really key and really core to it. So I devised the project as a way of inviting people to participate and to work with me in this inquiry. And so the project that I initiated was called the Local Know-How. And this is essentially was the invitation, was to ask people in the locality, you know, their about their knowledge, you know, asking people to participate. So did you grow up in a generation when you or someone around you had the know-how to make, repair, reuse, forage, hunt or grow? Would you be interested in sharing this knowledge and skill with an art research project in Cobh in the Great Island area? So as a way of kind of connecting with people in the community as well, this is where I guess my friendship and relationship with Moggy Summers actually started, because this was a subject matter that related to kind of thinking about sustainability, and I was familiar with Cobh Zero Waste. So this became the catalyst, I guess, for making that connection. So I contacted Moggy. She was the key contact person, I suppose, at the time that was mentioned on the Facebook page, I think, or maybe on the website. So what I was interested in was meeting people in Cobh that would be interested, I guess, in sharing knowledge and skill, and, you know, finding out what were the types of knowledge and skill maybe that had, you know, gone by the wayside, and to think about it in terms of like tapping into this latent knowledge, sensibility and attitudes, in particular within older communities and their capacity to be resourceful, which, you know, historically may have been born out of necessity. And also to ask the question, can relearning this kind of know-how type of knowledge have a renewed value and purpose to recover more sustainable ways of living? So I guess these were questions. They weren't necessarily, you know, assuming that, yes, they are. I mean, if anything, asking these questions was an invitation to have a discussion and a conversation, you know, around the potentiality of this. So a number of workshops were organised between that took place both within the Sirius Arts Centre itself and also in the local community centre. So in this event here, so some of you will be familiar with the Chester cake, and the Chester cake is traditional in Cobh, is traditional in Cork. In other parts of the country, I think it's a different name, like gur cake or gurrier, I think it's referred to, and it's a bread, or it's a cake essentially that's made out of stale leftover cakes and breads from the day before. And you can see here on the right hand side, it's made with lovely spices, and then it's coated with lashings and lashings of icing sugar on top. But it's something that, you know, a lot of people, the older generations, would have been familiar with growing up. So it's something that has kind of resonance in the culture. And it's still, I mean, you talk about this to anyone, and people will have a connection with it. Another activity was fishing net knitting. And this was with local retired fishermen, but among other things, Kevin Jones. So he facilitated a number of workshops, and I think the key thing here was that, like, you know, I mean, the question here comes back to me: what was my role as an artist? You could say, in this sense, it was the facilitation of creating these events and opening up the space for these conversations to happen, because these workshops were participant led. You know, it wasn't me that had the expertise as such, and it was a way of kind of, I suppose, facilitating an event to happen for people within the community to share this sort of skills and knowledge. So in a sense, that's effectively what a lot of this work is. It's about tapping into this latency that's there and reviving it. And if it's as much about the activity of doing it, and what's really incredible is the conversations that arise out of actually doing these activities. So sometimes it's not actually about the activity itself. The activity almost becomes a vehicle through which a particular kind of thinking and action can emerge. And it's in the doing of it rather than kind of sitting around the table and just talking, but by actually physically engaging with materials. So the materials aspect of it actually is quite important as well. Working with your hands in particular has important value as well. And then with, again, out of conversations with Moggy in particular at that time, we were interested in the series in running an event like this and to do it in partnership with Cobh Zero Waste. And Moggy had said to me at the time that Cobh Zero Waste were interested in running one of these events, had intentions for running it before, but for various reasons, it just didn't happen. So this partnership was really successful in terms of both the use of the space within the Sirius itself, a real convivial space. So we set it up and ran it as an actual cafe, set up tables and chairs, and then there were 11 volunteer participants who participated, and Miguel mentioned Megan, who is also works in the Sirius Art Centre, came on board as well. So there was quite a range of people that offered their skills, and it was absolutely fantastic. The vibrance, there was such a buzz about doing something so simple. Like in one way you could say it's very simple. There were kind of there were some aspects of it that were quite what would you say, administrative, that we had to try and sort out. For example, one of the most popular things is getting electrics fixed. So in order for us to be able to offer the service or the exchange of the learning for electrics, the electrician needed to have his own insurance, and he needed to have, I've just forgotten what it's called now, but a certain certificate that would allow him to actually do this publicly. But he's a licensed, electrician, and he volunteered his services free of charge. And it was just the generosity and the willingness to, to share this knowledge with each other was actually, I think, it sort of signaled something, that there's an appetite there in a community to actually want to do this. And sometimes it's really about maybe about trying to, how do you facilitate that, but how do you also facilitate it in a sustainable way? So this event happened last November. We could say that it was exactly a year ago that this event actually happened, and there hasn't been one since, and for a number of reasons, but there were talks about maybe running another one again. So yeah, so that's sort of where that was the creative inquiry. Would say these were things that came out of it. There was lots of other things that came out of it that don't relate necessarily to this conversation, but these were some of the kind of key things that did emerge. And these conversations then have continued with Miguel, who came in just at the point of transition when this project was wrapping up. And we were doing a presentation in the City Hall in Cork City, and that became the point where we began to have conversations around some of the themes and ideas actually in this project. So the last thing I'm going to say really just relates to maybe where we're at now in terms of some of the things that have come up, and the things we say that I would be thinking about in terms of going forward. So some of the things would be thinking about, considering about how maybe tacit and place-based knowledge has declined with advances in technology driven by a globalized market, to think about the role of manual skills and materials, and think about what new community-based models of knowledge exchange are possible involving an intergenerational approach, where that could bring together the long-sighted knowledge and experience of older members of society with the aspirations and actions of youth climate activists, shaping the wave of new eco-politics. To consider maybe how new hybrid forms of local know-how that can imagine a world that is socially and environmentally just. And this brings us to a book that we've been recently looking at called Take Back the Economy, written by J.K. Gibson Graham, Jenny Cameron, and Stephen Healy. And within this book, there are essentially like a radical set of thinking and acting tools to shape the economies that we live in. But I think a key thing within this book is that it introduces ethical thinking, in particular, to frame ways to shape our economies. And I think that sort of aspect around ethics actually is really key and important to consider. And then the last point, in terms of thinking about latent knowledge, that within this book, there's also a model called the iceberg model, which is as a way of kind of looking at community economy exchange. And in a sense, what it's doing is that it's a model of looking at, we say, the visible level of the economy is what we're familiar with, and it's the capitalist model. But underneath the iceberg, underneath the water level, as we said, is the hidden level. There is the latent economic activity that happens between people and community, and often that type of activity is the unpaid domestic labor, all that kind of, or even, you know, as regards to the type of knowledge and skill, we say that's become surplus, you know, to society, in terms of what I was referring to earlier, in terms of working with older people. So yeah, so that's kind of that's my spiel in terms of, you know, where we've come from and sort of where we're at now in relation to this. So engaging with Cobh Zero Waste and with Miguel in the Sirius Art Centre, I mean, it's a real exciting moment in terms of all this sort of alliance and intersection of ideas, but also of approaches and possibilities as well. So the idea of sort of building this sort of, at the moment, I guess, online sort of wider community to engage in this discussion as well is also kind of really exciting. So I'll leave it there.
Thank you so much, Colette. So the reason then we are here today and why somehow I kind of brought Colette and Cobh Zero Waste back together, or been trying to do that, is exactly, it starts by trying to then answer to what Colette said about the event that was organized between Colette, Sirius, and Cobh Zero Waste in November last year. And at some point, Colette said something like, there was talks about doing this more regularly. And for different reasons, it didn't take place between last year and now. And that's exactly where I come from, or where I start to take start to take action. The principle is that we want Sirius Art Centre to be a place where not these events or this interface between theory and practice, between community engagement and art practice, between generation of ideas and implementation in real life of change, that is that Sirius Art Centre becomes a place where these things happen regularly rather than just once in a while. And in the context of a project only, from a project only, starts to become embedded in the activity that we want to develop. And of course, that in practical terms, that requires some shifting of ways of thinking within the organization, and also within the organization, how the organization engages in dialogue with what is around it, but also in terms of visibility and public presence. And also in terms of making this kind of activity part of an holistic approach where it seems natural and doesn't seem odd, where it seems crucial to what we are doing as an arts organization and not just something that is on the side. Now, with COVID-19 from emerging in March and basically shaping our everyday life, both personal and collective and institutional, until now, and potentially in the next 6 months, things have been much more difficult to plan and put together. So again, this is why this is where we are now. It's kind of planting the seed and piloting discussion and ideas that will ultimately lead to some more of these this kind of framework. Because what matters to me then, and that's why maybe I could ask a question to you and Stephen, is, and then everyone can pitch in and start and ask any questions, make any comments. And some, before I even go into the questions, some of the references that then Colette put forward at the end of the presentation when she transitioned from the Creative Inquiry project, which she developed, into the theoretical background of what we want to do now, we will then further elaborate on that, and there will be other sessions from next week onwards where we'll have opportunities to delve more deeply into some of the concepts, but also into practices that one way or the other are shaping the concepts, but are also outcomes of that. But the question that I would like to basically ask you both is, how do you see the translation of a set of ideas around what it means to be an artist today, and how an art practice can have a political output on one hand? On the other hand, how do you see how do you see the activity of creating awareness raising moments, like those workshops that Cobh Zero Waste organizes are basically a moments of awareness raising to, how do you see that each one of you have a direct impact into change at the level of, basically at the level of society within social life? And if any, what is needed to, maybe if it's not happening yet, what do you think is needed to actually make that happen? Or if you feel there is already something happening, how do you see that? I'm not sure if I'm making myself clear, but
yeah. I think you, in one sense, I don't know the answer to that question. It's quite a big question. But what I do think is that maybe one of the sort of maybe key things that an artistic practice can do and does do is work with the creative aspect of imagination, and using the imagination as a way of visioning a future, but also visioning alternative ways of being. I think actually is probably most importantly, I think is what artistic practice can do in terms of maybe a form of kind of political action. So while it might not necessarily, you know, be direct action in terms of in a sense, I guess one way that I would see the activity that Cobh Zero Waste implements is a form of like direct action in terms of running campaigns, having a public visibility in terms of the market stall, providing zero waste services in terms of doing refill. So I do see a lot of that as quite direct action, and that having a direct, I suppose, effect and impact. The artistic practices can sometimes utilize those strategies, but I think what the artistic practice is doing is something broader than that. And it's a way to try and tap into, again, to tap into the potential of things, the unseen, the unthought of, and so that's why these kind of spaces become discursive spaces, is that we can think about other ways of doing things, and we can explore other ways of doing things. And that's where creative activity actually can allow us to maybe consider these other possibilities that have not been thought about before. So it comes together through collective thinking, through collective imagining together. I guess that would be my first initial response to that question.
Yeah, I was going to make the same point actually, Colette, about the involvement with organisations like schools. Actually, you know, we've done a lot of work with schools in trying to get them to think about what their future island might look like, and you know, and art projects are a great way of doing that. It really unleashes some fantastic ideas about things. You know, I know we have some ideas about that, and working with Sirius on that aspect, because it would be great for some of the school kids to work with artists, you know, in such a beautiful space as the Sirius. You know, I just think that has so much tremendous potential. And you know, and that's what our work is all about, is visioning a better future and building back better, and all of these other things that are phrases that are coming out of the COVID situation as well. But you know, that's basically what we're about, and you know, and what everyone should be about in a way. I mean, I quite often get confused about people talking about economics as being, you know, sort of this sort of mainly financial and economic system-based thing. But you know, economics is about trying to reach some or to improve quality of life and build better lives for all of us and for the planet as well. And you know, and it's the economic system is how we get there. And so we keep forgetting, you know, that we've got to look at those goals. And yeah, Miguel, I think you're right. I mean, how do we get our actions to lead to bigger changes in society? And the problem, I guess, with groups like ourselves is we're small. We're all working. We only have so much time in the day and resources available. And you know, it's a question of setting realistic goals for yourself. And I think, you know, what we've tried to do in the past 3 years is just to gradually build up that awareness within the community around these issues. And we're now at a point that I think we need, you know, we need to get that pushed much further within the community. Although things like the market stall have worked really well, it tends to be the same people that are coming to the market every week. And, you know, we're missing big chunks of our island and our population that we haven't got to yet. And that's where we need to get to. And we also need to kind of, you know, influence the policy a lot more, because I feel that policy is a big obstacle, you know, in developing. And we've certainly had various meetings. We've had meetings with Simon Coveney and with other TDs to talk about our things. And sometimes we feel as though we're a bit, you know, we're further up the curve probably than they are, and they just need to catch up a bit. You know, particularly around the things like the incinerator campaign. But it's a question of, yeah, how do you actually influence that as well? And so we have worked with waste companies and trying to get to work with business as well, because you've got to have business working with you on these things. And I think that's happening more and more. I mean, you know, all of our team have been doing some amazing work. Like Moggy and Anna have done great work with the businesses in Cobh and trying to get them to practice much greener ways of operating. And you know, I think those kind of steps have certainly started to get a lot more kind of awareness around the town now. So I think sustainability is becoming mainstreamed, and waste issues are becoming a lot more mainstream than they were before. And I think we're on the cusp now of really starting something good. And you know, we have the opportunity now. We've seen what's happened during this awful pandemic. We've seen emissions go down, and we've seen, you know, things that pollution going down and those kind of things, which are, you know, secondary aspects to the actual effect of the pandemic. But there are clearly opportunities for us now that we can build on, and I think, you know, that's what we've got to do now. We've got to look at how we can actually mainstream it even further.
Sorry, thank you so much, Stephen. And Colette, yeah, very interesting reflections. I think there's more to process. There's more to process than actually to comment at this stage. But maybe for the sake of those that are not from Ireland, Cork County, Cobh, maybe Stephen, could you provide just a little bit more into the incineration campaign and what was the issue at stake? And because it seems that was not only from what you say today, but from other things I've heard, including artists who made work around that, it seemed that was a really important moment in Cobh, in terms of, like, on one hand, a clear, impactful potential enterprise with respect to environment, but on the other hand, a clear moment of mobilization from within the community around environmental matters. So maybe you could just articulate a little bit, like tell a little bit us the story for those that are not familiar with it.
Well, I'm not the best person to be talking about this because I was actually abroad for most of the time at which the company Endeavour, the Belgian company, well, quite global, were trying to develop or establish an incinerator in the harbour. So I guess there's been 3 attempts or major attempts by the company, and the amazing thing has been the way the community has got together and really fought them off at every phase, and without any real assistance from government or anything. When we've talked to TDs about it, the TDs have always said, well, this is outside of our control. This is a commercial thing, and and even our kind of government institutions like the Environmental Protection Agency, some of whom or the employees of whom have some of them anyway, at least, have worked in the incineration industry in the past. So you've got that kind of that issue as well within business. So there's been it's been an incredible fight by the community to do that, and the amount of money that's been raised to fight the case has been extraordinary. Because as you know, these things they went to the high court, I think, in the last round, and so these things cost a lot of money to fight, and we're still fighting. So even now we're still waiting a decision for this third round of or third attempt. But the crazy thing is that we've been looking at or following the European policy, and the European policy is clearly to start phasing out incinerators as much as possible. It doesn't fit with their circular economy plan. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense economically, and yet our politicians and our business peoples, and of course there's a lot of linkages between business and policy, of course, have really not rallied behind the community as much as I feel they should have anyway. I think this should have been a no-brainer, and it should have been kicked into touch very quickly. The problem is, of course, it drains resources. I mean, the amount of time and effort that's been spent on fighting this case unnecessarily is criminal. And I really think that when the case gets kicked out again for a third time, there should be some level of compensation to come back to the community for everything they've done to stop this thing happening and creating increased emissions, which it goes against climate change, it goes against the circular economy initiative, it goes against social fairness, it goes against health concerns. There are so many aspects of it that are wrong. For the sake of a company wanting to make profits and providing maybe some jobs, a few jobs, but much less jobs than there would be with more recycling and a greener economy. It just doesn't make any sense. So that's the background behind it. And I think in other countries it would never have got to a third stage. 20 years of one community fighting, and definitely somebody's got to make a film about it or a book or something. It's got to be translated into the arts sector somehow, because it's incredible what the leaders of this campaign have done. People like Mary O'Leary and Mary Hurley and Linda Fitzpatrick, and some of the leaders of this campaign have been absolutely incredible.
But it's why do you think then it's still potential something that might happen? Like what's happening in County Cork or in Ireland that enables this kind of thing still to take place in today? Okay, because 20 years ago, say thinking even within economy or politics, it was potentially quite different from today. You know, there has been, my impression is that there has been an acceleration of awareness raising with respect to environmental climate change and so on, that maybe 20 years ago we were still pretty much stuck into a kind of modernist narrative around more production, jobs and so on. Before I came to Ireland, I was working in England in a post-industrial site, which in the 19th century became for 25 years the central production steel producer of the world, and then became for 75 years the largest petrochemical site in the UK. And the damage in the environment there it's part of the everyday life of people there, but still the narrative was, pardon my English, fuck the environment, we need jobs and so on, right? And so my question is, in the place here, like what is the rationale? Because I mean, there was no industrialization that would justify that discourse here, as for instance, elsewhere in the UK, in the north of England. You see what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have had quite an industrial past in Cobh. So there may be an element of, you know, we had a steel plant, we had a fertilizer plant, you know, so we have had industry here in the past, and there may have been a kind of an assumption by maybe the companies involved and maybe even some of the politicians, you know, I don't know, that, you know, this was a suitable site for an incinerator. And also, you know, the fact that maybe 20 years ago, there was a thinking around, you know, what's going to be done with this waste as it increases, and the lazy attitude is not to, you know, implement the recycling schemes, which and you know, like recycling plants and recycling processing centers, and you know, and putting the money into that kind of infrastructure, which incidentally provides far more jobs than, you know, using than incineration would. The other factor, of course, is that we do have a pharmaceutical industry in the harbour, and there could be, I don't know enough about it, but there could be some pressure by the larger pharmaceutical companies who currently have to incinerate their own, you know, have their own incinerators, are very small kind of things, just that they're incinerating their own things. I think I'm not sure how many of them have it, but it's not that many anyway. And similar to like hospitals have to have their own incinerators for their own waste. And you know, that's fair enough. If there are dangerous things to do, then the polluter pays principle comes into operation, and if that needs to be done, so be it at that level, but not at a municipal level to be incinerating valuable resources that should never be burnt in the first place, particularly organic produce, but also, you know, all the paper and the other materials that get burnt unnecessarily and should be recycled. Yeah. So I don't know, Miguel. I really don't. To me, it's an absolute no-brainer. I don't understand it. All I can think is it's something to do with a collusion between business and politicians, which we know happens. And I you know, one of the things that I do worry about society, and I use the word the businessification of society. I think we're so totally obsessed with business, and I don't mean by small business. Small businesses are great. You know, we've got so many fantastic small businesses around the country, and they all have to run. But it's this obsession with having to have large multinational scale businesses that you know, for employment, and not concentrating on developing our own, you know, that have much greater potential, I think, for employment. So I think there's a real, to me, there's too much of a connect between business and politics, and and this obsession with business in society.
Yeah. Colette, could I ask you another question? And then I will just stop and everyone can just ask anything or make any comment, and then we'll wrap up. Stephen mentioned the word, used the word resources, and we talked about economy a little bit. So in early thinking around the development of capitalism, there has been, it's a Marxist concept, the difference between exchange value and use value. And one of the things that always was curious to me since I became aware of the project of the creative inquiry that you were doing at Sirius, and then I became more familiar with the project through your presentation than through speaking with you, is when you were engaging, say, with someone who knows how to do knitting with fishing nets, because this person used to fish probably 50 years ago, 40, 30 years ago, 20 years ago, and stop doing it, or no longer needs to do knitting with fishing nets, right? Fishing net knitting has been replaced by other things as well. My curiosity is how much of the value that you recognize in that practice, to the extent that you believe that practice and the learning and the skills behind it can be shared with others.
Mm-hmm.
How much do you think those who actually still have that knowledge, which we recognize, or that skill, but how much do you feel they actually know they have that, and that is more valuable than they might have thought, because it emerged from practice of life?
Yeah.
And then it's not that we are monetizing it, but we are assigning other kind of value. And now that value becomes much more important within the context of sustainability, because, it was things that were made in a way that basically were prototypes of what we call now circular economies. So I'm curious about that.
Mm-hmm. Well, if we take that as the example, the fishing net knitting technique, which I did with Kevin Jones. Now, I did meet other men who would have worked in and around the sea, not always fishing, but would have also had those skills as well. So in answer to your first question, did they recognize the value of it? Because it has a practical purpose. I would say no, that there wasn't a recognition of the value of it. So for example, fishing net knitting still happens. Fishermen still repair nets. You actually would still see them today down on the quays at the back of the train station. So when you come in that road, you will often see fishing trawlers parked up there or docked up there. And you'll see them with massive nets, and they're knitting them. So what they're doing is that they're repairing their nets. So they still use some of the similar techniques, working with the needle, working with the threads. So to make them from scratch for what they used to make them before there's no it's not economical to do it. Number one is the time that it takes to actually do it. And also there are machines that can make it now, that can make it much faster. So there's a time is money. There's a time and economics in that it doesn't have, it wouldn't have the same value and function within the industry itself. Though your question to me is, what was it that I was recognizing within it? So I think that there's the manual skill within it. So there's the physical knowledge of, because I'd never seen that technique done before. I'm familiar with knitting more in terms of related to kind of clothing and fabrics, and but I'd never actually seen the technique done before, and it fascinated me. So therefore I felt like I really want to learn how to do it. And also it's actually very fast. It's a very fast way of knitting if you wanted to make something. Though, so I felt that there was something actually in this physical, this physical technique that he had that's disappearing and that's not going to be used anymore. And the other thing I felt was that that thing of what I was saying earlier about thinking and action, and there's something about, you know, I mean, I spent quite a bit of time with him up in his workshop. I would have maybe visited him maybe 3 times and maybe spent like the bone maybe up to 2 hours with him. And then we organized 3 to 4 workshops where we invited people to come and learn the technique as well. And the thing I found was that in the there was a sort of an uncovering of a history. So there's a social history that relates to Cobh that's actually embodied and embedded within the action of actually doing it as well. That was emerging as he was making and as he was teaching it to other people. There was something that was latent that became a vehicle to reveal something. So I found that in particular really interesting as well. And I knew that that would happen when he would start to show me, because then the conversation would start to emerge. And there's something about the way our memory works through embodied action. You know, so you remember things by doing things. There's a body memory there. So that was being kind of evoked and stirred by the action of actually doing it. So there's something about performance, there's something that emerges through, I would see it as almost like a archival, historical performance or something that was something was emerging as the action was actually, as he was doing it. So there was all that, yeah, invisible stuff in it that I felt was there. And what I also felt was that the longer that we spent time together, there was a mirroring that happened. So he was constantly fascinated by what's so interesting about what's so interesting about this? What do you find interesting about it? And he became curious and fascinated by my interest. And I think that then began to reawaken something in him. Not even reawaken, but for him to kind of look at it differently, because originally it was a practical thing that you did, you had to do it. And now he's kind of seeing a different value on that activity that actually had more significance. And I think there's a kind of a cultural heritage within these actions, within these sort of activities, within this embodied knowledge as well, that really I feel there's maybe more value in that than maybe it's kind of directly economic value in relation to the fishing, whereby, you know, again, it's about kind of how do we extend our understanding of economies and this sort of community-based economy, and that are kind of, again, hidden, latent and embedded within communities. And I guess that's what I'm interested in now, is how we can kind of find other ways of tapping into this other potential that's there, and that is inclusive, that includes, you know, wider scope of people, not just, the age bracket within which you're productive in kind of more capitalist economy sense of it.
So I think that's exactly the point where we are trying to come together, which is recovering that knowledge, assigning the value that was lost, recognizing that value, and through that enabling alternative practices.
And maybe it's a repurposing of that knowledge.
Exactly.
You know, because we talk about repurposing, and we often talk about in relation to materials. So material had one life as performing one function, and then it can sort of reconstitute itself as something else. So repurposing of materials, but also kind of repurposing of this latent knowledge as well, in terms of it can be assigned a new value, and essentially what it needs perhaps is maybe for it to be framed as such, a reframing.
Yeah, exactly.
I really like that idea of repurposing knowledge, because I think that's what the transformation that we're going to need to do is the society as a whole. You know, we do need to transform our thinking completely in order to achieve some level of sustainability. And we have goals that have been set under the Sustainable Development Goals and Paris Climate Change Framework and Circular Economy Initiative and all these things. They all recognize within those that we do have to completely transform our society and transform the way we think. And I like the idea that, we can look at knowledge and local knowledge and repurpose that back to more sustainable ways.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it links really nicely with, the the whole kind of look into the policy and how we're going to change our societies and economies into the future.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's exactly. So I think that's kind of what we are trying to explore here through our conversations, and so that we can maybe then, create a framework that enables implement action to take place after. Okay, so it's 9 p.m. We are more or less at our within our time frame, but if I would like to just offer the opportunity to anyone else to make any comment or any suggestion, or if it's too late or too early, depends. We will see each other in 1 week from now with Angie. We'll be presenting her life, but also her research around reusing. She became famous in Cork County for I mean, I became aware of you through the newspapers, actually. So it was, yeah, no, it's fine. It's good. It's actually good to have such a strong example, local rather than international, of someone who is changing their life, and basically pave the way, pave the ground to others to follow. Okay. So anyone else? Okay. So in this case, thank you so much. It has been really a pleasure and an opportunity to learn more as well. It was nice to see familiar faces in the screen. I hope we will see each other again in 1 week from now. Share with your colleagues or your friends what is happening. We've become used to Zoom now. It's not ideal, but it's what is possible. But it also, on the other hand, enables physical distant people to actually connect and bond in a different way. And we are all here connected by the same vision and same ideals. And I really hope that this is the beginning of further conversations, and that will, create both personally but collectively possibilities of change. Okay. All right. Thank you so much, and see you soon.
Very much.
Thank you.
Thanks,
That was
everyone.
great.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
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 Miguel, can I ask you a quick question while you're still on? Yeah, if you can hear me.